In the heat-drenched heart of Dallas, Texas, the engines of Gas Monkey Garage once roared with a defiant pride, echoing through the streets like the war cries of modern gladiators. Richard Rawlings, the charismatic and polarizing frontman of the garage, had built not just a business, but a televised empire. Through the lens of reality TV, he transformed rust into riches, breathing new life into classic American muscle and foreign exotics alike. With each high-stakes flip, each tight deadline, and every on-screen altercation, Richard cemented himself as a household name. Fast and Loud wasn't just a show, it was a movement. It brought garage culture into mainstream America, making horsepower cool again and welders into rock stars. Richard, with his leather jackets, fast cars, and faster lifestyle, seemed untouchable until the veil began to crack. Whispers started as rumors among the Dallas automotive community. Small talk passed around lift bays and behind toolboxes. But soon, the whispers grew louder. Something wasn't right at Gas Monkey Garage. At first, it was dismissed as jealousy. After all, Richard had always ruffled feathers. But then came the lawsuits, first one, then another. Vendors claiming unpaid bills, ex-employees alleging breach of contract, and former partners demanding a closer look at the books. The lawsuits were public, but the full story remained hidden, coiled in the shadows of legal silence and carefully crafted PR statements. Richard maintained his innocence, brushing aside allegations with a practiced bravado. But beneath the sunglasses and swagger, something darker was festering. The hammer truly fell on a damp October morning when federal agents raided Gas Monkey Garage. It was surreal. Black SUVs rolling past custom-painted hot rods, agents in windbreakers stepping over chrome-plated bumpers and polished concrete floors. The sight of law enforcement combing through shelves of car parts and computer servers was jarring to fans, many of whom watched in disbelief as live drone footage captured the scene. The Department of Justice released a short statement. "We are conducting an ongoing investigation into financial irregularities connected to Gas Monkey Garage and its affiliates." That was all it took. The empire Richard Rawlings had so carefully constructed over 2 decades began to crumble. Initial findings from the investigation painted a damning picture. There were allegations of forged invoices, shell companies created to launder money, and offshore accounts linked to fraudulent automotive exports. The most shocking accusation was the manipulation of vehicle appraisals. Cars allegedly purchased for $10,000 were listed in internal documents as costing $100,000, allowing Rawlings and his team to inflate profits and secure fraudulent loans. What had started as an edgy, risk-taking garage business had allegedly evolved into a web of deception, fraud, and tax evasion. Former employees turned whistleblowers came forward, each story more shocking than the last. One claimed he was ordered to strip VIN numbers off classic cars and replace them with forged plates. Another said he was paid under the table for months, instructed never to speak of it. These weren't mere financial blunders, they were systemic manipulations. As the case grew, the public's perception of Richard Rawlings began to shift. The brash entrepreneur who had once inspired a generation of gearheads was now portrayed as a con man, manipulating the very industry he claimed to love. Headlines shifted from admiring to accusatory. Fast and fraud. Gas Monkey empire fueled by lies. Rawlings faces federal charges. The narrative was no longer about epic car builds or road trips across America. It was about court dates, indictments, and potential prison time. But Richard didn't go down without a fight. True to form, he took to social media in a defiant livestream. With his signature goatee and leather cuffs, he looked straight into the camera and declared, "This is a witch hunt. They're trying to tear down everything we built because they can't stand success. I've made enemies, sure, but I'm not a criminal." For some, it was convincing. His most loyal fans rallied behind him, launching hashtags like #StandWithRawlings and #GasMonkeyForever. But for others, it reeked of desperation, a man cornered, lashing out. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings intensified. Federal prosecutors presented a 198-page indictment outlining 17 counts, including wire fraud, bank fraud, and obstruction of justice. The courtroom was packed when Richard Rawlings first appeared before the judge. Gone was the TV star's charm. Dressed in a somber gray suit, he looked tired, his eyes sunken, the bravado dimmed. He pleaded not guilty, of course. His defense team argued that Richard had trusted the wrong people, that he wasn't involved in the day-to-day financial dealings, and that any discrepancies were the result of poor accounting, not criminal intent. But the evidence said otherwise. Testimonies, emails, phone records, and financial statements all pointed back to Rawlings. He wasn't just aware, he was allegedly orchestrating the scheme. Outside the courtroom, the effects were equally catastrophic. Gas Monkey Garage shut its doors indefinitely. Sponsors pulled out. Merchandise sales plummeted. Discovery Channel quietly removed episodes of Fast and Loud from its streaming platforms. Fans who once wore Gas Monkey t-shirts with pride began distancing themselves. Other automotive influencers, once eager to collaborate with Richard, now spoke of him in past tense, as a cautionary tale. The garage, once a mecca for car enthusiasts, stood eerily silent, its custom-built walls echoing only memories of its roaring past. At the center of the storm, Richard Rawlings remained both defiant and enigmatic. He continued to post sporadically on social media, each time insisting he would be vindicated. "I didn't build all this just to burn it down," he wrote in one post, accompanied by a photo of his first car, a 1974 Mercury Comet GT. But the court didn't operate on sentiment. With trial dates looming and new charges being added, Richard faced the real possibility of spending decades behind bars. The fall of Richard Rawlings was not just the unraveling of a brand. It was the disintegration of a persona carefully cultivated in front of millions. It was the shattering of a myth, that of the maverick builder, the untouchable king of car culture. The fans were left stunned. How had it come to this? Was it ambition that led him astray? Greed? Or was the system always flawed, and Richard simply got caught playing a game others play better? The answers remained elusive, buried beneath layers of courtroom documents and confidential testimonies. But one thing was certain: the world of reality TV and automotive culture would never look at Gas Monkey Garage the same way again. But what unfolded next was beyond even the wildest imaginations of the courtroom spectators. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for her no-nonsense demeanor, leaned forward, resting her elbows on the bench. Her voice cut through the heavy air like a blade. "Mr. Rawlings, do you have any final words before sentencing?" The room fell into a deeper silence, anticipating another flamboyant outburst or last-minute attempt to sway opinion. But Richard stood solemnly. No theatrics. No signature smirk. Just silence. He looked around the room, eyes landing momentarily on each of the jurors, his legal team, and then his estranged former employees, Aaron Kaufman among them, who had returned not out of spite but out of a strange curiosity, as though he needed to witness the final nail driven into a chapter of his life he once believed in. "I started Gas Monkey with a dream," Richard finally spoke. His voice was quieter than usual, almost hoarse. "Not for the fame. Not for the money. I wanted to build something that roared. That meant something. I lost my way. I let ambition cloud judgment. But I didn't do this." His hands trembled slightly. "I didn't commit the fraud they're accusing me of. I didn't manipulate those books. I didn't falsify those parts. Someone set me up." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The judge raised an eyebrow. The prosecution exchanged quick glances, sensing an unexpected twist. Rawlings continued, "There are forces at work here. People with more to lose than me. People who wanted Gas Monkey gone not because of what it was doing wrong, but because of what it could become." The judge was unmoved. "Conspiracy theories won't save you, Mr. Rawlings." But that's when something truly extraordinary happened. A man at the back of the courtroom stood up. He wore a faded Gas Monkey Garage jacket from the early days, one of the limited edition originals sold before the company went mainstream. His face was partially obscured by a cap pulled low over his brow. He raised a hand. "Your Honor," he called out. The bailiff moved quickly. "Sit down, sir." But the judge, with a wave of her hand, allowed the interruption. "State your name." The man removed his cap. Gasps again. It was Benji Matter, the long-lost former CFO of Gas Monkey Garage, who had vanished without a trace during the height of the company's legal crisis. For months, people speculated he had fled the country. Some believed he had been silenced or worse. Now here he was, in flesh and blood, stepping forward as if summoned by fate itself. "I have evidence," Benji said firmly. "Rawlings isn't lying. He's not the one behind the embezzlement. I have the files. I kept them hidden because I feared for my life. But I can't let an innocent man go down for something he didn't do." The courtroom erupted into pandemonium. The judge called for order as attorneys scrambled, phones buzzed, and reporters ran for their cameras. Rawlings looked stunned. Benji approached the bench with a USB stick held out like an olive branch. "This will show everything. The transactions. The signatures. The real culprits. They're bigger than you think, Your Honor. We're talking about a syndicate embedded in the collector car auction world, money laundering through fake restoration projects. Rawlings was just their cover. The judge recessed the court. Within an hour, forensic analysts were poring over the files. What they found sent shockwaves not just through Dallas but across the entire automotive and financial industries. Benji's data revealed a complex web of transactions implicating multiple players, including auction house executives, shipping magnates, and even international crime syndicates that used restored vehicles as vessels for dirty money. They had created an illusion, rare cars appearing to be worth millions, restored by famed garages, then sold to dummy buyers at inflated prices to mask massive wire transfers. Rawlings had been their unwitting pawn. His fame, charisma, and media influence made him the perfect frontman for legitimacy. When he began asking too many questions, things started falling apart. Benji, under threat, disappeared. And Rawlings, surrounded by falsified documents and doctored audits, became the fall guy. The fallout was immediate. The judge halted sentencing. The trial was reopened. Investigators launched a sweeping inquiry that led to multiple arrests across several states and countries. Media outlets dubbed it the Gas Monkey Conspiracy, and suddenly, Rawlings was no longer the villain but the whistleblower who had unknowingly stumbled into a billion-dollar laundering scheme. But the damage to Richard's reputation had already been done. Despite being cleared of the most serious charges, he was still left facing civil suits, business collapse, and a public weary of his larger-than-life persona. Sponsors had vanished. The show was long cancelled. Employees had scattered. Gas Monkey Garage, once a vibrant hub of innovation and showmanship, stood empty. The monkey logo on the front of the building faded in the Texas sun. Months later, Richard re-emerged, not in front of a camera, but behind the wheel. He had bought an old, rusted Dodge Charger, the kind that spoke more of hard times than high velocity. No cameras followed him. No crew. Just him and the open road. Occasionally, he'd stop at a small-town shop, lend a hand fixing something, share a story, then move on. It wasn't redemption. It was something quieter. Reflection. Escape. But the world hadn't forgotten him. Documentarians and journalists tracked his movements. Podcasts dissected the conspiracy. A Netflix miniseries was announced, to be executive produced by none other than Aaron Kaufman, who by now had launched his own ethical restoration network, Phoenix Wrench. When asked why he would take part in retelling the Rawlings story, Kaufman simply said, "Because it needs to be told the right way this time. Because I think he paid enough." Meanwhile, the original Gas Monkey property was auctioned off in silence. A mysterious buyer from Tokyo acquired the land and turned it into a high-tech electric vehicle R&D lab, adding further mystique to the location's cursed legacy. No one knew for sure if Richard had any connection to the sale, but rumors swirled. Richard remained elusive. Occasional sightings surfaced, him in a diner in Sedona, Arizona, a blurry photo in Tijuana, a grainy security cam image of a man with a familiar swagger in Prague. Each sighting fed the legend. Gas Monkey fans divided, some condemning him, others canonizing him as a flawed hero chewed up by an industry as dirty as an oil-stained wrench. Then, on the one-year anniversary of the trial's dramatic reversal, a surprise broadcast hit the airwaves. A podcast titled The Last Monkey dropped without fanfare. Hosted by Richard himself, it began with his voice, older, rougher, quieter. "I'm not here to win you back," he said. "I'm just here to tell my story. 1 mile at a time." Each episode chronicled a car, a town, a memory. The Mustang he lost his virginity in. The Chevy Nova he and Aaron built that never made it to TV. The Thunderbird his father drove before the heart attack. Every story was raw, unfiltered, filled with joy, regret, rage, and humor. It wasn't a confession. It was a reckoning. The podcast caught fire. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was human. Listeners who had written him off tuned in week after week, drawn by the authenticity missing from reality TV. He wasn't trying to sell them anything anymore. He was just trying to find peace. Sponsors returned, this time in the form of mental health orgs, veteran-run mechanics collectives, and non-profits teaching automotive skills to inner-city youth. Rawlings declined every offer to commercialize the show. He claimed the ad revenue went straight into scholarships and rebuilding community garages. Gas Monkey, as a brand, was dead. But as a spirit, It was reborn, stripped of gloss, grounded in grit. And so the saga of Richard Rawlings became less about courtroom theatrics or fraudulent empires, and more about the strange resilience of a man who'd once lost everything on the biggest stage and chose not to climb back up, but to build something new in the dirt. And then came the letter. Not an email, not a tweet, but an actual letter, handwritten, smudged with motor oil, mailed to a Dallas newspaper that had once crucified Rawlings in its front-page editorials. It simply read, "To those still chasing me down the road, I'm not coming back. Not to the fame. Not to the spotlight. Not to the monkey suit. I lived fast. I paid slow. I forgave no one until I forgave myself. But now I'm building something. No cameras. Just cars and kids who need purpose more than a paycheck." It was signed only, R. Journalists scrambled to verify its authenticity, handwriting analysts were brought in, and the paper published it in full. The reaction was seismic. Forums exploded with discussion. Gas monkey diehards, once fractured by betrayal and divided loyalty, found unity in the simplicity of the message. Rawlings had, in their eyes, finally become what he was always meant to be, not an icon, but a teacher. A cautionary tale with a heart that still beat in time with pistons and burning fuel. Then came photos, leaked from a remote Arizona mechanic school. Blurry at first, but unmistakable. Richard standing among a circle of teens, sleeves rolled up, showing them how to weld a frame, grease under his nails, laughter on his face. He had partnered with a non-profit to establish a tuition-free program for at-risk youth, many of whom had never even held a wrench before. "Teach 'em to build a car," Rawlings told one donor, "and maybe they won't end up in a courtroom like me." News spread fast. Celebrities donated tools. Former employees, including some who once testified against him, returned, not to apologize, but to contribute. "This ain't redemption," Rawlings told a visiting reporter. "This is resurrection." Aaron Kaufman visited the program in secret. The two former friends didn't hug, didn't shake hands, but they stood side by side in front of a half-built 1967 Camaro, each holding a wrench, the silence between them louder than any apology could be. A photo was snapped without them knowing, and when it surfaced online, it was shared millions of times with a single caption, "Legends never die. They just rebuild." The final twist came during an automotive auction in Los Angeles. A pristine gas monkey-built custom Corvette was brought out. Its provenance was questioned, but when the VIN was traced and validated, it was revealed to be the last car Rawlings ever titled in his name before the collapse. It sold for $3.2 million to an anonymous bidder. The winning note was later made public, "For the garage that raised hell, and the man who burned in it. May your next build be better." And somewhere, under the dry sun and wide skies of the American Southwest, Richard Rawlings climbed behind the wheel of another forgotten machine, turned the key, and let the roar echo across the desert. No longer running, no longer chasing, just driving forward.